In January 2010, Google took the wraps off what it called the world's first superphone. No carrier skins, no custom UIs, just pure Android straight from Google. It was called the Nexus One, and it promised to redefine what a smartphone could be. I'm Jason Howell. I'm a huge fan of Android. I've been there since the beginning, in fact. And today we're going back to where it all began, the rise, the fall, and the unexpected legacy of that little 3.7-inch device. By late 2009, the smartphone landscape was dominated by Apple's iPhone and a sea of carrier-skinned Android devices. Apple had just sold 7.4 million iPhones in 2009, capturing a big share of the growing smartphone market. Meanwhile, just 1 year prior, Google's own reference phone, the HTC Dream, also known by many as the T-Mobile G1, had debuted as the very first Android handset. Enthusiasts loved the Dream's open design and slide-out keyboard. But mainstream buyers were left choosing between expensive iPhones and the more familiar BlackBerrys of the time. But Google had a vision. Instead of licensing Android to manufacturers, they would build a true reference device. And rumors abound on sites reporting on an upcoming Google phone. And in fact, I saw the device before it was officially announced. I was at a dinner party with some friends one evening. There was a guy there that I didn't know, but he was with our friends, and he had this phone, and I had been hearing about the Google phone. And I kind of put two and two together. He ended up letting me kind of paw at it for like 10 minutes. And I tweeted about my 10 minutes after the dinner with that unreleased device, the experience from it anyways. And that ended up making the rounds on tech sites reporting on this device. 1 day later, on January 5th, 2010, at an Android Developer Day event in Mountain View, Google and HTC officially unveiled the Nexus One. It was codenamed Passion, and it promised stock Android updates direct from Google, an unlockable bootloader, and bleeding edge hardware. No carrier middlemen either, no custom skins, just Android as Google intended. The Nexus One wasn't just a reference phone in name. It really packed some pretty awesome hardware for the time in 2010. A 1 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon QSD 8250 CPU paired with 512 megs of RAM, powerful for its time anyways, 3.7-inch WVGA pen tile, remember that? AMOLED panel with impressive colors, deep blacks. I mean, you looked at this display compared to the LCD displays that we were seeing a lot of at the time, and it was just miles ahead of that LCD screen technology. 512 megs of onboard storage, not very much, but it did include a 4 gig micro SD card in the slot, had support for up to 32 gigs of storage there. Pure Android 2.1 Eclair. Pure because you didn't have Moto Blur, you didn't have Sense or TouchWiz mucking things up. It's just Google's vision, and that included services like voice to text input, turn-by-turn navigation, live wallpapers, which is a huge signature of the Nexus One to people who owned one. Dual microphones for dynamic noise suppression, so you got clearer calls because it is, after all, also a telephone. And it had a fast boot interface along with an easily unlockable bootloader. That made developers happy, so they could flash their custom ROMs and early gingerbread builds, or people like me who weren't developers and just liked flashing a new ROM every day, which really remained a testament to Google's open philosophy. Oh, and that little glowing trackball down at the bottom, an incredibly unique control mechanism for a smartphone when touchscreen control wasn't good enough, although it didn't really stand the test of time. Every spec screamed next generation Android. And for enthusiasts and developers, the Nexus One was the long-awaited dream device. Within 48 hours of launch, XDA developers' threads were alive and strong with CyanogenMod builds tailored to the Nexus One. The Nexus One suddenly became an unofficial co-pilot for thousands using Google's turn-by-turn navigations within Google Maps, something we definitely take for granted now, which really showcased Android's promise as a mobile OS built around the company's existing services. And then you had that AMOLED display, which was just absolutely beautiful. beautiful, excellent in sunlight, far easier to use than its LCD counterparts. You didn't have bloatware. That was of course a huge selling point here. It meant more storage could be used for user-chosen apps and user personal data. Screenshots of custom boot animations were all over the forums, and it all just cemented the Nexus One's cult status. Now, despite all the nerd buzz, the market numbers told a very different story. In its first week, Google sold just 20,000 Nexus One units, far below expectations, well behind the insanely popular Motorola Droid's 250,000 launch tally. Google's direct-to-consumer web store model was a bit ahead of its time, of course. It required customers to take a leap of faith because they often couldn't touch or even test the device in stores. And carrier subsidies that were existing at the time made the $529 unsubsidized price of the Nexus One a pretty tough sell. On July 16, 2010, just 7 months after launch, Google announced it would close the Nexus One store and cease public sales, marking the end of its first foray into hardware retail. But the story didn't end in July 2010. The Nexus One's ethos of pure Android and direct updates quietly laid the groundwork for Google's future flagships. I'm going to get to those, but if you love deep dives into technology history like this, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more retrospectives like this. I plan to do a lot more. Google learned from the Nexus One experiment. Instead of exclusively online sales, the Nexus S launched later in 2010 through carrier partnerships. That brought pure Android to stores, into the stores, and into subsidized plans, which Americans were very used to having, while keeping that unlockable bootloader intact. A few years later, in 2014, the Android One program rebooted the reference device concept for emerging markets. The goal there was to make sure that low-cost phones still received timely OS updates, which was really a hallmark of the Nexus One's original promise of fast, direct Android releases. And by 2016, rumors circulated once again that Google was working on a true Google phone. That ended up being, you guessed it, the Pixel line. Premium hardware, exclusive features, sold through both online and retail channels. The Pixel family of smartphones is a direct descendant of the Nexus One's DNA. As a result, logging onto your Pixel means today getting security patches and new OS features months before carrier skin competitors, although that gap is narrowing, just as Nexus One owners did back in 2010. The Nexus One really stands as a landmark. It's the first time Google exerted full control over hardware, software, and updates. It was a bold experiment in openness, an unlockable bootloader, direct OS patches, an unadulterated Android UI. Today, whether you use a Pixel or a Nothing or a OnePlus phone with a near stock skin, you're experiencing trace elements of Nexus One DNA. Faster updates, cleaner interfaces, easy unlocks, that's all now standard expectations. Proof that the Nexus One's vision reshaped Android's trajectory. And historically speaking, the Nexus One really symbolizes Google's commitment to pure Android, developer empowerment, and the idea that hardware should serve software, not the other way around. What do you think was the most impactful feature of the Nexus One? Did you have a Nexus One? Want one? Is there another device that you want me to do one of these retrospectives about? Well, let me know in the comments below, and thanks for joining me on this deep dive into smartphone history. Special thanks to my patrons at patreon.com/Jason Howell for supporting me in everything I do. We'll see you next time.